Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. That's the sound of recovery right there. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Way of Life Big Book Study. My name is Dave, and I am a recovered alcoholic. And
my name is Blythe, gratefully recovered alcoholic.
Right. Okay, let's take a stand and a moment of silence, followed by the Serenity Prayer. Who's going to be my new foreman?
God, grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. It looks like Brittany was asked to read the preamble.
Hi, Brittany, alcoholic.
Hi, Brittany.
Preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organizations, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thanks, Brittany.
And it looks like Darcy has the set-aside prayer.
Oh, okay. My name's Darcy. I'm an addict and alcoholic. God, set aside prayer. God, please help me set aside everything I know about myself, the 12 steps, this book, the meetings, my disease, and you, God, so I may have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please let me see the truth.
Thanks, Darcy.
Okay, so at this meeting, myself and Blythe are going to read and explain the first portion, the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, where we find our program. There's going to be time at the end for questions, discussion, sharing, whatever. There is paper, pens, highlighters, all that jazz in front of you, and if there isn't, just ask there's some up here if you need it. So we're going to start. First, Blythe is going to take us through a really quick recap to where we left off, which is the start of more about alcoholism. So there's some pretty big stuff in here. This is a really quick overview, so if you haven't been through the process, get a sponsor and do it thoroughly. But
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So this is a big book-based meeting, and as such, we, Dave and I aren't up here to talk about our opinions. We're to talk about the things that come out of this, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And right off the hop on the title page, there's some vital information. It says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. Anything in italics, very important, right? So the story of how many thousands of them have recovered, it's like a recipe. If I do what they did, I'm going to get what they got. I don't have to, if I'm making a chocolate cake, I don't have to believe in the recipe. I just have to follow the instructions. So the same thing applies. If I do what they did, I get what they got. We have this common problem, common solution, and a common course of action that's laid out in our big book. And that's fantastic. We got into the doctors. We went through all the forewords, all that kind of stuff. Vital information in there as well. That we're 100 men and women who've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So the main purpose of this thing is for them to show you how they recovered. It's not about telling you what to do. They're going to show us how they did it, and we just got to follow what they did. In the doctor's opinion, we learned about the allergy or phenomenon of craving, that when I have one drink, I'm off to the races, and I've never been able to, not never, but I can't control how much I use when I start to drink. The doctor really laid out our illness for us. He very subtly touched on a couple points. He didn't talk about the second symptom, this malady that centers in our mind, a lot, but he did talk about it a little bit, and he also talked about a psychic change, which is this spiritual experience that we're talking about. And being the chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital, I think if he would have said spiritual experience, he would have thought he was a quack.
That probably scared people off too, right?
But and through the first few chapters, we really ease into the second symptom, because if I walked in here and you guys told me that I was crazy and I needed God, I wouldn't have stuck around. So we really talk about the allergy up until page 23, and then on page 23 we flip and start talking about this second symptom, this malady that centers in my mind, where I've placed myself beyond human aid, where I cannot stay stopped on my own willpower. I need a power greater than myself. Obviously, look at my history. So now we're getting into more about alcoholism. So we've really learned a lot about alcoholism, right? So what are we learning now?
More about alcohol.
There it is. All right, let's get into it.
And by this point, you've determined and diagnosed yourself as an alcoholic. So you need to keep going, right? Page, I think it's 23, isn't it?
20 and 21.
Okay, those pages, Blythe knows. Anyways, there's the classes of drinkers, right? So if you identify with that third type, then you should probably keep going with this process. And if you haven't and you are, then maybe your sponsor should read them. Anyways, okay, so we're going to get started. Page 30. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics.
So on page 20 and 21, it talks about the real alcoholic versus the moderate drinker and the hard drinker. The hard drinker looks a lot like us, he drinks like us, but if given sufficient reason, right, if I'm losing my kids or I'm getting in car accidents or whatever, I'm able to stop. If that's sufficient reason for me to stop, then I'm not a real alcoholic. My friend Dave always says that I could fill this room with sufficient reasons to stop drinking, and it was never enough. Right, so if a sufficiently strong reason probably makes you a hard drinker. If that doesn't matter, you cannot stop, cannot moderate, hard or real alcoholic. Carry on.
No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows.
2 symptoms of alcoholism, one of the body, one of the mind. It says it over and over and over and over and over again in these pages. Carry on.
Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, we will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker.
You hear a lot about the obsession in the fellowship and even in sponsorship. This is pre-step 1 stuff. When I was out there, was I trying to control how much I drank? Was I trying to enjoy it? I couldn't do both of those things at the same time. If I was trying to control it, I wasn't enjoying it. And if I was enjoying it, I wasn't controlling it. And I suffered from that obsession for like 20 years. And then I came here and I learned about the illness of alcoholism.
Yeah. So that obsession that I can control and control and enjoy it directly contradicts our first symptom of the allergy, which says I can't control the amount I take once I start, right? So the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death.
We are the lucky ones in this room who've gotten into recovery. So many pursue that obsession that they can control or enjoy drinking until they die.
We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics.
2 symptoms.
This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed.
So we smash this obsession that I can drink and use like other people, or that I can quit on my own power. We smash that obsession based on the truth when I look at my history. This is an illness, not a thinking pattern. Right? If the obsession is the problem, I can see it coming. Right? The problem is that I have this malady that centers in my mind where I'm just going through my day and I end up with a drink in my hand. What the fuck? Right?
Yeah, and I think the doctor really helps, right? Like, he's saying that you have this allergy, that you know, and all the things they talk about in the doctor's opinion really helps smash that idea that, I'm not going to do this, right?
And just because I'm thinking about drinking doesn't mean I'm going to drink.
We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization.
I like to say that I paid for my seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. PAID, pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We all know what it feels like to be bottomed out, hopeless, right?
We are convinced to amend that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better.
Progressive illness. Even when I'm sober, this thing is getting worse. When you hear about people who've stayed sober a long time and they relapsed, they say you left off right where you left off. You actually start off worse.
Yeah, like you were drinking the whole time.
Yeah, they have all those new drinks at the liquor store we need to try out.
Yeah. We are like men who have lost their legs and never grow new ones. Neither does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. We've tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, there has been brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but hasn't done so yet.
And I don't think there's a lot of scientists out there trying to make us like normal drinkers, just so you know.
Yeah. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe they are in that class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic.
I love how it talks about the experimentation of the experiment of the first drink. And the experiment follows the self-deception, right? I lie to myself and then the experiment starts.
If anyone who is showing inability to control his drinking can do the right about face and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we have tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. Here are some of the methods we have tried. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from crack to meth, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever with and without a solemn oath, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums, and accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. We could increase the list ad infinitum.
So once again, this is that obsession that somehow, someday I'll control and enjoy my drinking and the ways that I went about it for so long.
Can I interrupt for a second? You have a different pen. If you have one. Thank you.
We do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Here's the key. Try it more than once.
Yeah, I like to think that I could probably go to the pub and have 2 beer today, but I know that if I tried it more than once, I'll get loaded. Anybody with an alcoholic tendency will be like, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It will not take long for you to decide if you are honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of jitters if you get full knowledge of your condition. Though there's no way of proving it, we believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking.
So this is kind of what the second symptom is all about, is that whether or not I can stop. You know, that's the difference between the hard drinker and the real alcoholic. Like I mentioned, the real alcoholic cannot stop on his own power. And this chapter has 4 case studies in it of this malady at work, of their inability to stay stopped. Most of them had knowledge of Alcoholics Anonymous and what it is and the symptoms of our illness. You know, had been explained alcoholism, and yet it wasn't enough.
Yeah, the problem isn't necessarily stopping; it's
staying stopped.
Staying stopped, or stop not starting. But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. We have heard of a few instances where people who show definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for long periods of an overpowering desire to do so. Here is one. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He's very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quiet himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he could get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever.
That's the allergy, right? When I start drinking, I can't control how much I'm going to take.
He made up his mind that until he'd been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55. After a successful and happy business career, then he fell victim to a belief which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. Out came his carpet slippers and a bottle.
You hear a lot in the fellowship about old-timers relapsing, right? And I call them carpet slippers. Thanks.
In 2 months, he was hospitalized, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital in the meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not.
Yeah, so we talk about this progressive illness, and I had mentioned even when you're sober, this thing's progressing. 25 years ago, he had the ability to stop. Now when he started again, he couldn't.
Yeah, and 25 years ago, it was only kind of, he was able to see, it's kind of affecting my ability to like do business, right? I better stop, and he could. 25 years later, he started again, and in 2 months, he was in the hospital from it, right? So like, that's a pretty far cry from like, ooh, it's affecting my business to, holy crap, drank myself into the hospital, right? So there's progression over that time.
When you really dig into this book and this malady that centers in my mind, it is absolutely like, I can't even put it into words, like the power that this second symptom has over us. Like I say, even when we're not drinking, it's just crazy.
Yeah, so in 2 months, he drank himself into the hospital, right? And then he said, okay, I'm going to gather up all his forces, and he attempts to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem, which money could buy, was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Human power, right? Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remain sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years found he was just where he had left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol.
Part of my mind is against me, right? When I get sober, I'm like, I'll be able to drink after, fill in the blank.
Yeah. X amount of time. Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop as he did on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it because none will really want to stop, and hardly one of them, because of their peculiar mental twist already acquired, will find he can win out.
Right, the peculiar mental twist. That's another term for this malady that centers in my mind, right? Strange mental blank spots, peculiar mental twist, insidious insanity.
Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. To be gravely affected, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time nor take the quantities some of us have. This is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholics are astonished at their inability to stop.
Right, so that's kind of what our job is in the fellowship, is to explain these two symptoms, and particularly this malady that centers in my mind, that I can't stop, right? And we explain that to people, and they're like, oh yeah, that's, not as bad as you are, but then they find that they can't stop. And they're like, oh, maybe those guys have a solution, right?
Yeah, there's like all these examples. Everyone drinks themselves into the hospital and comes into contact with us, and we tell them about alcoholism, and they're like, got it! Self-knowledge is the
Thanks
key.
for the information.
Self-knowledge is the key. Like, no, you missed, the key thing is that self-knowledge won't do it, right? We who are familiar with the symptoms see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try and get them to see it. As we look back, we feel we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our own willpower.
Right, so the book's challenging you to look at your history, right? When you wanted to stop, were you able to stop?
If anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. If he's real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success.
Scant chance.
In the early days of our drinking, we occasionally remain sober for a year or more, becoming serious drinkers again later. Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic.
So this is the cunning and baffling piece about alcoholism and this malady that centers in my mind, is that I can stay sober for weeks or months, and I think that everything's okay, right? But it's just tick, 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 and it's a very difficult thing to explain to people.
Can I say something? So I was clean for 14 years, but I was on medication, I was miserable, and then I had a relapse, and it was the worst relapse of my life, even though I hadn't been actively using. For
Carpet
14 years.
slipper.
Yeah.
We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. Never going to do this again. And we last a couple weeks, right? I lasted like a couple hours, but hey. For those who are unable to drink moderately...
So that's the allergy.
Yeah. The question is how to stop altogether.
That's the malady.
We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not.
Some people in Alcoholics Anonymous can choose whether or not they're going to drink. Most of us, or the real alcoholic, cannot. And this is what it's talking about here. Like, if I could choose not to drink, I wouldn't need God or these steps. I don't have that ability. In order for me to stay sober, I have to have a psychic change / spiritual experience in order to stay sober. Nothing else will work.
And the thing is if you can choose to not do it, then you probably wouldn't have come here. Because the consequences wouldn't have got bad enough for you to get here, most likely, right? Many of us felt that we had plenty of character.
I'm a great guy.
There was a tremendous urge to cease forever.
Yes, there was.
Yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it. This utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity, have to, or the wish, I really want to.
Yeah, it's a very powerful half a paragraph.
Yeah.
I can be successful in all other aspects of my life. I can have money and I can have, all this stuff. But when it comes to alcoholism, I can't stay stopped and I can't control how much I take. And I found it impossible to stay stopped. Carry on.
Yeah, no matter.
And I was baffled, right? I was baffled. Like, why can't I stop? I would make promises to myself and everyone around me, and I just couldn't hold true to them. And I never understood that I was sick.
Right? No, and we talk about necessity or the wish. I wanted to stop for a long time. I needed to stop for a long time, right? When the judge says, if I see you back here again, you're going to prison. You're like, ooh, I better stop. And then I get drunk and high the day before my court date, and I'm off the run again until I'm back in jail, right? I needed to stop, and I couldn't.
And this is the stuff that we need to be talking about in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, because people are coming through our doors dying because they cannot stop. And we have a solution.
Yeah, and it's in the book, right? We need to say that as well, right? It's the process, not the fellowship. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously, this is the crux of the problem.
So it's saying that this malady that centers in my mind is the crux of the problem. This is the problem.
What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink?
It's not asking you. Anytime the big book asks a question, it's presenting the question and it'll answer the question in the following paragraphs.
Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon.
And somebody in the fellowship, we even treat people like that sometimes, right? The chronic relapser. We're like, why doesn't he just stop?
Yeah. Why does he? Of what is he thinking?
So here's another case study. I love this one. We're going to get through this one tonight.
Okay. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He is a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us.
Here it is.
We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of those occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition.
He knew he was a real alcoholic, that he couldn't stop on his own power.
Right. So he came into contact, we explained these two symptoms to him, right? We kind of explained step one. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection.
So he wanted to stop and he needed to stop.
Yeah, he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story.
I came to work on a Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern that I once owned. I had a few words with the boss.
Go fuck yourself.
But nothing serious. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a Boston Pizza where they do have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar for me because I had been going to it for years. I'd eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table, ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking.
So
Is Jim thinking of drinking?
Was he thinking of drinking here? No. Right? Says it. Tells us. He's not thinking about it.
I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I wasn't being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey, poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another.
So what are we seeing here, right? The last part is we're seeing that allergy, right? He had the malady struck, parallel reasoning, which we'll get into, and he had the first drink, and that went so well, he had another one, and then he had another one, and go ahead, Blake.
Sure, so it's this suddenly piece. Like if I'm going 80 kilometers down the highway and I'm passing a lady who's doing 75 and she slowly goes into my lane, I have time to think about it or to process it and I can slow down or pass her. But if I'm doing 80 and she's doing 75 and she suddenly changes into my lane, what happens? Car accident, right? And that's the piece that this malady is presenting, that it's not about thinking about drinking. This guy says twice in one paragraph that he was not thinking about drinking. Suddenly, bam, he's got a drink in his hand.
And he had the vague sense, I don't know if you guys can identify with this, I sure can, like a little part of you's going, no man, you probably shouldn't do that. And you're like, shut up! We're going to quiet you up, right?
Thus started.
What?
Thus started.
Oh, yeah. So thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him.
This is in italics.
He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk.
Mm-hmm. So much knowledge is about himself as an alcoholic. He'd been, they explained to him what this illness was. The first 3 chapters of this book, plus the doctor's opinion, really are an explanation of quote-unquote step 1, but really what it is, it's learning about alcoholism. It's identifying the problem, and then steps 2 to 12 is the solution, right? So he knew what the problem was. And we tend to think, I know that I'm an alcoholic and I can't drink. You're going to get loaded.
Yeah, because we don't even think about it. That's that piece about play the tape back or play the tape forward, however you want to look at it. Did that work for him here? No. Right? Like he had the vague sense, but he was like, nope, it'll be fine. My sound reasoning paralleled that sudden thought that I should drink. And he's like, no, it'll be okay. It's a full stomach, right? And then the next thing he says here, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity.
That's the insanity that step 2 is talking about, being restored to sanity, where I don't fall victim to this malady that centers in my mind. The malady gets placed at bay.
So back on 35, he knows that he's going to the bonker bin if he drinks. He knows he's going to lose his family if he drinks, right?
Does he get drunk?
Does he get drunk?
Yes.
Yep. And that's the insanity, right? In that moment, I should have a drink. I don't think no, because I'll sell everything and be smoking crack in a basement by the end of the week. My brain says it'll be fine. I've got a full stomach. It'll be different this time, right? And whatever the definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think this an extreme case. To us it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characterized of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences.
Right? Sometimes I do think about drinking.
Right? But there was
I'm thinking about it previously sometimes. But sometimes I'm not.
But there was always the curious mental phenomenon that paralleled with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for drinking or for taking that first drink. My wife's being a bitch. I deserve this. My boss is an asshole. I deserve this. Is that really very reasonable when I drink all the rent money and my wife gets even more mad at me? Or my boss fires me because I don't show up for 4 days? No, that's crazy.
Curious mental phenomenon, yet another term to explain this malady that centers in my mind.
Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. Next day, we could ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity, how could it have happened?
Right? Baffled again.
In some circumstances.
We'll stop there.
Okay, yeah, sure.